Keys hit the entryway table with the familiar metallic clink, shoes by the door. Jacket tossed over the chair, all the ordinary sounds of a husband returning home. Except nothing about this morning was ordinary. I was sitting at the kitchen table when he walked in. My coffee had gone cold hours ago. I had not slept. I had spent the entire night watching the clock slide past midnight on the day after my birthday, knowing exactly where my husband was and choosing not to imagine it anymore. Eric stood in the doorway and looked at me like I was the one creating tension. "You are overreacting," he said casually, as if he had not disappeared all night. I looked at him and noticed something that would stay with me forever. He looked tired, but he did not look guilty. There was no urgency in his voice, no shame in his eyes, just mild annoyance, like I was inconveniencing him by being awake. "She was struggling, Grace," he added. "Lauren had a panic attack. What was I supposed to do, ignore her?" I did not answer. "Babe, come on." His voice softened into something meant to sound reassuring. "She is going through a hard time. She just needed someone." I finally spoke. "You did not answer your phone. I called you 6 times. It was on silent. I did not see them until this morning," he said, shrugging. That shrug did it. In that moment, something inside me did not break, it settled. I looked down at my left hand. The wedding ring sat there quietly, a thin gold band I had once loved more than anything. Without saying a word, I slid it off my finger and placed it on the table between us. Eric stopped talking. "What are you doing, Grace?" I stood up. For the first time in years, my legs felt steady. I had not always been this quiet. Before Eric, I was the woman people noticed. I laughed loudly, spoke freely, and said what I thought without apologizing for it. My friends used to joke that you could hear my laugh from across any room. I took up space without asking permission. Somewhere along the way, that woman faded. It did not happen all at once. It never does. It happened in small moments that felt harmless at the time. The first time I chose not to argue because Eric looked tired. The first time I convinced myself that my discomfort was me being sensitive. The first time I swallowed a thought because keeping the peace felt easier than explaining why something hurt. I became good at adapting. If Eric was distant, I gave him space. If he dismissed something I cared about, I told myself it was not important anyway. If my instincts whispered that something was wrong, I silenced them with logic and loyalty. Marriage teaches you compromise, people say. What no one tells you is how easy it is to confuse compromise with self-erasure. I stopped asking questions that might lead to uncomfortable answers. I learned how to read Eric's moods before speaking. I learned how to smooth things over, how to make myself smaller so the relationship could feel bigger. I told myself this was maturity. But the truth was simpler and harder to admit. I was slowly abandoning myself in order to keep a marriage intact that was quietly breaking underneath my feet. Sitting at that kitchen table the morning after my birthday, I could finally see it. I had not changed because I had grown. I had changed because I had learned how to disappear. Lauren had always existed on the edges of our marriage. Eric mentioned her early in our relationship, almost casually, like he was checking a box. High school sweetheart. 4 years together. The kind of bond that never really goes away, he said, smiling like it was a harmless piece of history. I smiled back. I told myself mature adults could stay friends with their exes. I wanted to be secure, reasonable. The kind of woman who did not feel threatened by the past. At first, it really did seem harmless. A message here and there, a casual mention of grabbing coffee. Eric would bring her up in conversation so easily that questioning it felt petty. I did not want to be the jealous wife who read too much into things. But there were signs, I see that clearly now. His phone lighting up late at night, turned slightly away from me, messages he answered quickly, then put the phone face down on the table. Laughs he did not explain, conversations that stopped when I walked into the room. Once I found an earring in his car, not mine, small, silver, definitely not something I owned. Eric laughed when I showed him. It must have been there forever, he said, probably from before we even met. I believed him because believing him was easier than imagining what the truth might be. When we got engaged, Eric proposed in front of his family. Everyone cheered, I was glowing. Later that night, scrolling through photos online, I saw a comment under one of them. "Beautiful ring, he has good taste. Lauren." I asked Eric why his ex was commenting on our engagement photos. He barely looked up from his phone. We are still friends. What is the big deal? So I let it go. I let that go, and so many other things with it. My birthday fell on a Tuesday that year. Nothing extravagant was planned. Just dinner at home, a small cake from the bakery I loved, and the quiet comfort of being with the person who was supposed to choose me every day. Eric said he would be home early. He even kissed my forehead that morning and told me not to wait up. I waited anyway. The cake sat untouched on the counter. The candles stayed in their box. As the evening stretched on, my phone stayed silent. No text, no call, just excuses forming in my head before he had even given them to me. By 10, I called him, straight to voicemail. By 11, I called again. Then again. 6 times in total. Each one unanswered. Each one tightening something in my chest I had spent years pretending was not there. Midnight came quietly. The day I was born ended without my husband. When Eric finally walked in the next morning and told me Lauren had a panic attack, something clicked into place. Not loudly, not dramatically, just clearly. I understood the difference between an explanation and a performance. This was a performance. He spoke calmly, reasonably, as if the situation made sense, as if my hurt was an inconvenience he needed me to manage better. I looked at him and realized I was done filling in the gaps for his stories. I was done making his behavior easier to accept. The woman who waited up with a cake and unlit candles was gone. In her place was someone who finally understood that being understanding had cost her everything. That was the moment the spell broke. And once it did, there was no putting it back together. Before I left the apartment that morning, I did something I had never done in our entire marriage. I went to Eric's desk. His laptop was open, the screen dimmed but still awake like it had been waiting. I stood there for a moment, my hand hovering above the trackpad. Trust had always been my rule. I told myself marriage only worked if you believed the person beside you. What a convenient belief that had been. My fingers moved before my fear could stop them. I did not know exactly what I was looking for. I only knew I could not leave without knowing the truth. The messages were easy to find. There was a conversation labeled Mom. I almost closed it out of habit. Eric talked to his mother often. But something about the timing caught my attention. The messages were from the night before, from the hours he had been gone. I opened it. It was not his mother. Last night was perfect. I missed you. Me too. I will tell her I had a work emergency. She still does not suspect anything. That was when my breathing changed. I kept scrolling. My hands were steady, but my stomach turned with every line. Message after message. Weeks, months, years. Jules is clueless. Always has been. That sentence stopped me completely. This was how my husband spoke about me. Not with anger, not even with guilt, with casual certainty. Like I was a role he had learned how to manage. There were messages from our wedding day, from the reception, photos I had never seen, hotel rooms, smiles that did not belong to me. He had been texting her while I danced with our families. I sat back slowly, the room feeling suddenly unfamiliar, like I had stepped into someone else's life. This was not a mistake. This was not confusion. This was not complicated. This was a choice, made again and again, while I stood beside him believing in a marriage that had never truly existed. I closed the laptop gently, like the truth might shatter if I slammed it shut. I did not confront Eric. I did not yell. I did not demand explanations. I had already heard everything I needed to hear in words he never meant for me to see. I went to the bedroom and pulled a suitcase from the closet. I packed slowly and deliberately. Clothes, my toothbrush, my laptop charger, only what I knew I would need for a few days. Eric followed me down the hallway, his confusion turning into irritation. Are you really doing this, Grace? You were just walking out? I did not answer. When I passed him, I caught the scent of perfume on his shirt, sweet, unfamiliar. Another detail I would never be able to forget. Grace, this is not how marriage works, he said, louder now. I stopped for a moment and looked at him. You spent my birthday with your ex-girlfriend, I said quietly. That is not how marriage works either. I zipped the suitcase. I walked out of the apartment without looking back. That night, I checked into a small hotel across town. The room was silent in a way our home had not been in years. My phone buzzed nonstop. Eric's messages came in waves: anger, bargaining, apologies that felt borrowed. I did not respond. For the first time in a long time, I did not feel anxious about where my husband was. I already knew. The next morning, I drove to my mother's house. I had rehearsed the conversation in my head the entire way there, but the moment I walked into her kitchen, the words came out on their own. The birthday, the messages, the years of lies I had only just uncovered. I did not soften anything. I did not protect Eric's image. For the first time, I told the truth exactly as it was. My mother listened without interrupting. She did not gasp or rush to fill the silence. She just watched my face, the way mothers do when they are piecing together things they have sensed for a long time. When I finished, she reached across the table and took my hands. "I knew something was wrong," she said quietly. "Every time you came home, you looked smaller. I did not want to push before you were ready." That was when I started to cry. Not loud, dramatic sobs, just quiet tears slipping down my face as the weight of pretending finally lifted. "I thought if I tried harder he would choose me," I said. "I thought love meant understanding everything." My mother squeezed my hands. "You were always enough, Grace. He was just never willing to give you the honesty you deserved." Sitting there in her kitchen, I felt something unfamiliar settle into my chest. Support. Not advice, not judgment, just someone standing beside me, not asking me to minimize my pain or explain it away. For the first time since my marriage began to unravel, I did not feel alone. And that made all the difference. 3 days later, Eric showed up at my mother's house. I stepped outside before he could ring the bell. I did not want him inside that space. He stood on the porch holding a bouquet of roses, my favorite, his expression carefully arranged into something that looked like regret. "Grace, please," he said softly. "Can we talk?" "About what?" "About us. About fixing this. That is what marriage is, right? Working through the hard stuff." For a brief moment, I felt the familiar pull, the part of me that remembered good days and inside jokes, and the version of him I thought I married. It would have been easy to take the flowers and pretend this was the turning point. But then I remembered the messages. "I read everything, Eric," I said. "All of it." His face flickered, just for a second, enough to tell me he knew exactly what I meant. "That does not mean our whole marriage was a lie," he said quickly. "Lauren was just a weakness. An old habit. It did not mean anything." "If it did not mean anything, why did you lie for 3 years?" He exhaled sharply. "Because I knew you would react like this. You always take things too far. You do not understand that people are complicated." There it was. Even now he was trying to make my reaction the problem. I looked at him and felt something unexpected. Calm. "You spent our entire marriage choosing someone else and expecting me to stay quiet," I said. "There is nothing to fix." "Grace, please." "I want a divorce." The words landed between us, solid and final. I turned and walked back inside, closing the door before he could follow. For once, he had nothing left to say. The following week, I sat in a quiet office across from a woman named Rachel Carter. She did not rush me. She did not interrupt. She listened while I told the story from beginning to end. The birthday. The messages. The years of deception I had only just uncovered. When I finished, she folded her hands and looked at me calmly. "Do you still have access to the messages?" I nodded. I had taken screenshots of everything before I left. "Good," she said. "In this state, infidelity matters, especially when it is ongoing and documented." That word landed differently than I expected. Documented. Not emotional, not dramatic. Just factual. Rachel asked about our finances, the mortgage, our incomes, how we split expenses. I answered honestly, realizing as I spoke how much I had assumed instead of verified over the years. "I make about 30% more than Eric," I said. "My income has always been more stable." "And the down payment on your apartment?" "That was mine. Entirely. Eric did not have much saved at the time." Rachel nodded, writing something down. "That is important." She explained how trust often keeps people from looking too closely at money, how affairs rarely stay emotional, how they usually leave a financial trail if you know where to look. "You are not being vindictive by wanting clarity," she said. "You are being responsible." When I left her office, I felt something shift. Until then, I had been reacting, processing, surviving. Now I was preparing. For the first time, this was not just about heartbreak, it was about accountability, about refusing to carry the cost of someone else's betrayal. And I was finally ready to look at the numbers. That night, I logged into our joint bank account. Eric and I had always kept most of our finances separate. The joint account was for shared expenses, rent, utilities, groceries. I had stopped checking it closely a long time ago. Trust makes you careless in ways you do not notice until it is too late. The transaction history told a story I had not been paying attention to. Small withdrawals at first, then larger ones, transfers to an external account I did not recognize, restaurant charges in parts of the city Eric and I never visited together, weekend expenses that did not match any trip I remembered taking. Then I saw the jewelry store charge. $800. My chest tightened. Eric had never given me a necklace like that, not for my birthday, not for our anniversary, not ever. I kept scrolling. There was a hotel charge from Austin. A weekend he had called a sales conference. The hotel was not near any conference center, it was a resort. I pulled up his messages and matched dates, the same weekends, the same nights. Every lie lined up perfectly with the transaction. This was not carelessness, it was intentional. He had been funding his affair with money that belonged to both of us. Money I had earned. Money that was supposed to be building our future. I opened a spreadsheet and began documenting everything: date, amount, description. I cross-referenced charges with messages and calendar entries. When I finished, I had over 30 pages of organized records. I emailed everything to Rachel. Let me know what else you need. When I closed my laptop, I felt something unfamiliar settle in. The anger was still there, but it had changed. It was no longer sharp or consuming. It was focused. Eric had spent years believing I would never look closely enough to notice. Now I was looking. And what I was seeing was going to cost him far more than he expected. The divorce papers reached Eric 2 weeks later. I knew the moment he received them because my phone started vibrating non-stop. The messages moved quickly from anger to disbelief to desperation. You are making a huge mistake. You are going to regret this. I never thought you could be this cruel. Then, 20 minutes later, can we please just talk? I did not respond. What I did not expect was how quickly he shifted strategies. My mother mentioned that Eric had stopped by, unannounced, crying on her porch and asking her to talk some sense into me. My brother received a long message about how worried Eric was about my mental state, how I was under so much stress and making impulsive decisions. Then my workplace called. My manager asked me to step into her office that afternoon. She closed the door gently and looked at me with concern. Your husband called this morning, she said. He wanted to warn us that you might be struggling personally, and that it could affect your judgment at work. For a moment the old instinct flared, the urge to protect him, to soften the truth, to make things easier. But I was done doing that. My husband cheated on me throughout our entire marriage, I said calmly. I am divorcing him. He is not taking it well. She nodded slowly. I am sorry you are dealing with this, and for what it is worth, no phone call from a bitter spouse changes how we see your work here. That night I called Rachel and told her everything. Document it all, she said. If this continues, it strengthens your case. Eric thought controlling the narrative would save him. Instead, he was only proving how far he was willing to go to avoid facing the truth. A few days later, Rachel called me with a tone I had not heard from her before. Focused, almost pleased. I finished reviewing the property records, she said, and something important came up. My stomach tightened. What is it? The down payment on your apartment came entirely from your personal savings, not partially. Not mostly, 100%. I already knew that, I said. Eric did not have much saved back then. Rachel paused, and the agreement you mentioned, the one where he was supposed to contribute more to the mortgage to balance that out, was that ever put in writing? I thought back. The conversations, the promises, the trust. No, I said quietly. It was just something we agreed on. Rachel's voice stayed calm. The payment history shows that for the past 2 years, you have both paid exactly 50% of the mortgage. He never increased his share. I felt a slow wave of disbelief. I had never noticed. I had trusted the numbers because I trusted him. This changes things, Rachel continued. You contributed the full down payment and half the mortgage, while he diverted marital funds to an affair. Your equity is significantly higher. She explained what that meant. How fault and financial misconduct could justify an unequal division of assets. How this was not punishment but correction. When the call ended, I sat in silence for a long time. Eric had taken my trust, my money, and my silence for granted. But he had also left behind proof. For the first time since my world cracked open, I felt something close to hope. Not the fragile kind that depends on someone else. The solid kind that comes from standing on the truth. The court date arrived 6 weeks later. I sat beside Rachel in a quiet courtroom that felt smaller than I expected. Eric sat across the aisle with his attorney, avoiding my eyes. The man who once spoke so confidently about everything now looked tense, his shoulders slightly hunched, his jaw tight. Rachel began with the financial records. She laid everything out slowly and methodically. The joint account Eric had opened with Lauren, the steady transfers of money over more than a year, the jewelry purchase, the hotel stays, the resort weekends labeled as work trips. Each transaction was dated, each one connected to messages and calendar entries. Eric's attorney objected more than once, but the judge listened, flipping through the documents with careful attention. Then Rachel introduced the messages. Not all of them, just the ones that mattered most. The ones from our wedding day. The ones where Eric joked about how I would believe anything. The ones that showed this was never a mistake or a moment of weakness, but a pattern that existed before, during, and after our marriage. The courtroom was silent. When the judge finished reviewing the evidence, she looked directly at Eric. Mr. Holloway, is there anything you would like to say in your defense? Eric glanced at his attorney, who gave a subtle shake of his head. There was nothing left to explain. The truth had already spoken. The ruling came shortly after. I was awarded full ownership of the apartment. Eric was ordered to reimburse over $12,000 in misappropriated marital funds. He received no claim to my retirement accounts, despite requesting them. As we left the courtroom, Eric caught up to me in the hallway. I hope you are happy, he said bitterly. You have ruined my life. I looked at him calmly. You ruined your own life, Eric. I just stopped covering for you. Then I walked away. I expected to feel triumphant after the hearing. I did not. What I felt instead was quiet. In the weeks that followed, Eric's carefully maintained image began to unravel. His family knew the truth now. Not the softened version he preferred, but the real one. The messages. The money. The lies that stretched back years. Friends who used to laugh easily around him grew distant. Invitations stopped coming. Conversations became shorter, polite, careful. Lauren disappeared from his life not long after the ruling. The secrecy that had once made their relationship exciting was gone. There was nothing romantic about court documents and repayment schedules. Eric tried to reach me more than once, long messages about how unfair everything was, about how I had taken things too far, about how I could have handled it privately. I did not respond. Something important had shifted inside me. I was no longer angry enough to argue or hurt enough to explain myself. He was not my responsibility anymore. What surprised me most was the absence of satisfaction. I did not feel joy in his discomfort. I did not feel vindicated. I felt free. For years I had carried the weight of his choices without realizing it. I had adjusted, excused, and absorbed the cost of his behavior. Now that weight was gone. Eric was facing consequences, not because I wanted revenge, but because I finally told the truth and refused to protect him from it. And that was enough. 6 months later, I stood alone in the apartment and looked around as if seeing it for the first time. It was mine now, legally and completely. I had repainted the bedroom a soft sage green, a color Eric never liked. I moved the furniture, donated the pieces that held memories I no longer needed, and filled the space with light, plants by the windows, art on the walls that I chose without asking for approval. The apartment that once felt heavy now felt calm. The divorce had been finalized 2 months earlier. Eric paid the court-ordered reimbursement, though not without complaints from his attorney. The last I heard, Lauren had ended things with him shortly after the hearing. Apparently, the relationship lost its appeal once it was no longer secret. What surprised me most was how much energy I had now. I was no longer managing someone else's moods or monitoring lies that never quite added up. I started therapy. I reconnected with friends I had slowly drifted away from during my marriage. I even picked up painting again, a hobby I had abandoned years ago because Eric thought it was impractical. My mother noticed the change immediately. "There you are," she said one afternoon, her eyes filling with tears. "I was worried you were gone forever." I hugged her tightly, realizing how close I had come to losing myself completely. But I had found my way back. And this time, I was not letting go. Looking back, I do not measure my marriage by how long it lasted. I measure it by what it taught me. I learned that silence is not peace. It is often just fear wearing a polite face. I learned that love does not require you to shrink, excuse, or doubt your own instincts. And I learned that choosing yourself is not selfish, it is necessary. Eric once told me I was overreacting, that I was too sensitive, that I did not understand how complicated people could be. What I understand now is simple. If someone lies to you, uses your trust, and expects your silence to protect their comfort, the problem is not your reaction. The problem is their behavior. Walking away was not revenge, telling the truth was not cruelty, setting boundaries was not punishment. It was survival. If this story resonated with you, you are not alone, and you are not weak for staying as long as you did. Sometimes strength looks like endurance, sometimes it looks like leaving. If you found value in this story, please like the video, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and leave a comment telling us where you are watching from. Thank you for listening. And remember, choosing yourself is not the end of your story.